Hi, Chris.
Hey, Chris.
All right. Hello, and welcome everybody to this episode of the Revenue Rewired podcast. Hello, Jay.
How's it going there, Sarah?
So good. So
So
good.
good.
I'm getting sick of this humidity, which all the East Coast people have to laugh. I feel like the weather is always a hot topic here. Pun intended.
Well, it's funny. I told you it's like we for this weekend to help my older daughter move into a new place. We left Phoenix, Arizona. I don't know at like 9 in the morning was 117 I think there a day. And then we got up to Flagstaff 2 hour drive later and it was like 91, which I really was laughing at that. And then, of course, yesterday drove home, did the opposite, left there and it was humid and raining, but it was still in the low 90s and got here and was 100 and whatever. And my house was death. It was very, very warm here. So,
I know I did really enjoy the same when I went to Payson. I think at one point it actually was like 89 when it was rainy and thunder and lightning. It was very cool, but I know that's not everyone's jam. My grandmother used to be terrified of
hmm,
thunderstorms. Poor thing.
hmm.
Well, we would like to talk to you guys today about another potentially spicy topic, but we agree to disagree. And this one is fascinating. So, there's been a if you're following the conversation, there's like a rhetoric around roles and expectations, and I think that in a way it's healthy because in the past, in my past life, working in higher education, we faced a lot of consistent layoffs. And one of the hardest parts about working for that industry was the expectation of the job doesn't go anywhere. It just gets distributed. And I had a really hard time after my third like layoff above me. I was a very low peon type of person at this company. And after my boss got let go, the expectation was I would have this role. And I thought, first of all, I have no training in this. Like I knew what she did, but she was definitely light years ahead of me in her skills. And I was like, there was no conversation. And I never wanted to do that to anyone, but I think I feel guilty evolving roles into the adjustments that are happening around us. Like, AI was never part of anyone's role, but now it really should be a part of, everyone's role. Um, there's, conversations around governance. There's a lot of changes. And I think organizations that have someone coming or going in a role really have a good opportunity to kind of like revamp everyone else's to make sure that they're still going to work together, like a team, like they should. And one of the conversations that we have often with clients or peers is sales and marketing. First of all, are they a singular role? Like, what's the expectation there? And then, second of all, if you could only bring one on board, which one is it? Is it marketing that feeds sales, or is it sales to get leads and or to get prospects to close deals to help fund marketing? So, Jay, I'm
Hmm.
gonna ask you, first of all, do you think there's a place where it really is ever appropriate for it to be one role?
Wow. I think I'm going to be super annoying on this one for a couple of your questions, but I think it's going to always be this, it depends. And I hate giving that answer because again, I am blown away by, once I get, looking at the engine under the hood kind of stuff with current or potential clients. On paper they all look very similar, but you get underneath and you uncover so many nuances. I think it often depends on, the time frame of their business, their positioning, the resources they have in place, their strengths and weaknesses. And so I think in some organizations, I think it is so smart to have a kind of a head of sales and marketing or a chief revenue officer that kind of oversees both roles. But what I have experienced many, many times is when I meet someone in that role, people I think acclimate to areas that they're most comfortable with. I'll never forget we had a call with one of our clients who is that head of sales and marketing, and I loved it on the first call. She said she's a big S and a small M. which I thought was a cute way of kind of explaining that she's much more passionate about the sales side versus the marketing side. I would say I have seen it work very, very well in certain organizations as long as they have the proper leadership in place that's supporting them, and they do have a solid plan beneath that head of sales and marketing to oversee the marketing side and the sales side.
Hmm. Okay, well, that makes sense. And so if an organization has a singular role, how would they help define maybe the ratio of sales to marketing?
Wow. Um, Well, I think what my advice would be is, again, obviously it does depend, but I think you first look at where you have both short and long-term opportunities. Typically, uh, sales needs marketing to help drum up the opportunities because just only relying on outbound, on a typical sales or business development role can be, very challenging. And again, both marketing and sales people are typically, at least internally, quite emotional. When I've been purely in a sales role in the past, getting told no enough times in a week, it does eventually have some negative taxing on your brain. And again, that's why I think it's kind of fun when you do both roles, because if you're starting to get some, negative consequences from the sales side, the distraction is quite nice to maybe focus on marketing sometimes. That shouldn't be the reason why you do the marketing, but it is kind of nice to be able to flip-flop back and forth depending upon the opportunities. But, again, I think if you're a singular role, I think until you have proven success, you've got to do probably both roles equally. Because if you do too much of sales, that might short term be a great win. But then you're going to realize, oh my gosh, I've been doing all this work around sales and trying to close these current deals. And now that my pipeline is dry, I feel like I'm starting off from ground zero. I really wish marketing had helped me, increase the inbound leads during all this time. So that way, when I run out of my sales pipeline, I have things to fall back on. So I just feel like it's like, equal parts of the engine. You really should never slow down or stop any of them. But you got to find ways to get people to focus on the right priorities. And I think that's a little challenging sometimes if you're in the same role.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, to me, it's a big ask. Like that's two can be large departments. And so
Yep.
at some point, how do you, if you're going to keep in that role, like, we know people that have that title, how do they keep their sanity? Because to me, that would be like managing so many people. What are a couple of ways in which we've seen that work out well for the long term?
Um, I think, one of the areas that does signal to me that there might be a challenge here is not just the company size, but the quantity of resources and or the quantity of projects. So, for example, like one of the contacts that I have, she is head of sales and marketing and has, I think, 16 or 17 reports reporting to her. That's a lot of people. And so, again, I have learned that once I have more than about five people reporting to me, I start getting overwhelmed. And so I think, if your business does justify having that large of a department between sales and marketing, and you don't have a proper, maybe mid-management tier in place between the head of sales and marketing and then all the people doing the work, that might be the signal that you've got some, leadership gaps in place. And so, I would say if the organization has, the budget to afford maybe like I don't know, a 4 or 5 person total sales and marketing departments, maybe one person's in marketing and the rest are in sales, that size could probably work fine. But if your job is a leadership role is to oversee all of sales and marketing for a fast growing business, I think the amount of things on your plate, it starts getting really hard. And then what happens is if let's say you're, I don't know, a $25 million size organization and you have, hundreds of items in your pipeline between sales and marketing, If one of the people that's beneath the head of sales and marketing goes on vacation or, leaves the company, and then that now head of sales and marketing is having to do all that work because no one else can take on that responsibility to avoid losing momentum, that also is a signal that you might have some challenges here. So, again, it sounds like having one single role overseeing both might help at least resolve the alignment issue because it is frustrating when you have two different departments in place and the company's culture is not in the healthy place it needs to be, and there's a lot of finger pointing going on. Often a solution is, my gosh, why don't we just have one person oversee both departments to avoid this? But that solution might actually add more problems. So it's really hard to get the perfect situation in place, and it might look perfect today, but in 6 months from now, it might not be perfect anymore. So I think someone needs to be watching closely to determine whenever there are pivots that are needed to help ensure that there's scalability in place.
Hmm. And I think, some of these roles, they are more successful when they have like a singular point of contact that has a multiple resource reach,
Yeah.
like an agency, for example. Um, there's just, they can then, it's kind of like you're distributing the work, but they're owning the distribution instead of you. So I think being really smart about, your vendors and partners and that kind of stuff. Okay, so then here's the $1 million question.
Hmm.
If you can only have one to start, which one is it? And I'm gonna go first because I think this is where you and I are different. Um,
Chicken egg.
Chicken and egg, man, and gosh, that question will never get answered. But I I, I would say marketing because I think one of the things we talk about, and I'll be curious if you end up disagreeing with me and why, but marketing because without a strategy, nothing else can fall into place. And so, really, the first thing they're responsible for is auditing the current strategy. If you don't have one, creating a plan to get that strategy in place, connecting with the right stakeholders. Like, are we talking to the right people? They're going to have to dig in a lot if there isn't a strategy in place and figure out who are our ICPs? Is the market out there? How are we speaking to them? What do we look like? I think a lot of, and this is my Colby fact finder coming out too, is I would need all of this information to understand where I am before I can make any recommendations on how to proceed. And I think that's the smart play because if you're a head of marketing, you want to know what kind of resources you already have available versus trying to start from scratch or make too many changes that, I mean, let's look at Cracker Barrel. That poor woman tried to modernize an unmodernizable
Hmm.
company. I mean, now they're all in on being ancient again, which works. That's like what works for them.
Yep.
But
Nostalgic.
sadly, had they not really, yeah, nostalgic, had they not maybe tried that, I don't know if they would have known that so fiercely. So, in a way, I don't think that that experiment was such a failure. It was definitely a vocal one, but that's a marketing role. That's not a sales role. And so I think there's a lot that goes into it that is just behind the scenes without even executing any kind of creative or putting out a single ad or, anything of that sort, even touching how the flow of the website works. There's just so much that goes on internally. So it's like realigning your company internally on their expectations and messaging and creating then a better system to work with sales versus the other way around. Your turn.
Gosh, I feel like you set me up. You want me to fight with you on this one? What's funny on that is I don't disagree with you, but as you were talking, um, you know, my mind went into I want to avoid again saying it all depends, um, because as you were talking through a lot of items on the marketing side, I would I guess, label a lot of what you said as not really marketing, but more as far as like brand strategy and positioning. And so
You're
I think
splitting
for
hairs with me.
sure. But the reason why I'm bringing that up is I wanted to suggest, and this is again, I'm not trying to be, overselling, the value of what a firm like us does. But I have to say, I was talking with a good friend of mine about this, just recently, the exact same question about we have an X amount of dollars available, and we need to grow the business. Do we hire a head of marketing first or a head of sales first? And my advice there was that I think both those head of sales or head of marketing will likely fail if you don't have the right, you know, foundation in place. And so, this is where I think again, it's a really smart model of maybe if you don't have these roles in place, or if you have the roles in place and it's not working well, before you start doing an upheaval and start hiring a bunch of other people, it might be good to have like a fresh pair of eyes looking at the business and figuring out really what are the problems. Because on the head of marketing side, if you go down the path of focusing on that, which that likely would be the right place to often go if you've hired the right person, but that person is going to be generating, opportunities. Well, if there's no one on the team that has a strategic mind around how to help that funnel on pushing that through and learning from it, the marketing team's not going to have any kind of closed loop circle going on here, and so they're not going to know if what they're doing is generating value or not. And so, obviously, in a perfect scenario, you kind of need both in the beginning. But what my advice, I think, would be is you need someone to come in and look at the entire business and figuring out, how you're positioning the organization, your pricing and packaging and your offerings, how you do the handoff between sales and marketing and customer service, all the things. Because if you have all that really hard stuff figured out first, then the head of marketing now knows what they need to work off of. And then obviously then the sales person then needs to be responsible for talking with, those opportunities. But it's just a really tough one because if you invest all the energy to get all the marketing in place by hiring someone internally, after about 3 to 6 months of them doing the right kind of work, if they're experienced in the right and they know how to do what they're supposed to be doing, someone's going to need to be handling those leads. And that's even more painful if, let's say 10 or 20 or 50 leads show up and there's no one that can actually talk with these people. That almost gets more frustrating. Because again, a typical marketing person is not a salesperson. And I think that's where a lot of organizations think, okay, hey, you did a great job, head of marketing, to drum up some business. Now go meet with those people. It might really not only cause them distraction, but also unnecessary stress.
Hmm.
So I would say, if you're asking me that question, I would probably ask you back a zillion questions, understand kind of where the business is at and where it's trying to get to. So for me to figure out first, you have the right processes and people and products and all the things in place first. If the answer is you have all that, or at least have some good direction there, then honestly, actually would lean with what you recommended, Sarah. I think again, you've got to get the marketing in place and the brand, being found by the ideal clients, either in digital or traditional marketing. And then you got to very, very quickly follow up with a sales strategy.
Hmm. Yeah, and as you were talking, I was kind of thinking, well, maybe the right answer isn't necessarily either or either. I don't know, whatever, potato, potato.
Tomato, tomato.
It's not either of those roles. It's the hybrid, which is the revenue growth operator or whatever they're calling it, rev ops person, because there's a little bit of where I see rev ops as sort of like operational sales. I don't really see them so much as fully in marketing. Again, I think it's just so much of a like I see them filling up the revenue leaks that we talk about a lot. They've got all these flows that they're trying to make really smooth and frictionless, which is part of marketing through the handoff, but not as much the frontline stuff that we were talking about earlier. So with that, there's maybe a hybrid type of situation where sadly what we're talking about is multiple different people, but I think any good agency, for example, that would have that kind of experience and see that, like you said, a fresh pair of eyes. They don't have, if they're a revenue focused agency, they don't really have a bias either way in sales or marketing because marketers who are very passionate want their leads to turn into sales. So there isn't an infighting there. It's like a full experience through giving the company exactly what they're asking for in order to generate revenue. Um, and so I think there's maybe, to your point, a little bit of what kind of people are currently on your team, what kind of skills do they have? And I was honestly operating from the assumption that there was at least some sales team in place at the time.
Hmm.
Now, if that's not the case, which I made that assumption not even thinking about it until you said if there's no one to handle the leads, I assumed there was. We never even
Ugh.
talked about that. So this might be a fresher opportunity, like more of a new company that really doesn't have as much in place. And yeah, I would have to defer to your argument that, yeah, if you don't have anyone to even handle what's coming in, that's going to be a complete disaster and kill you by reputation alone before you even get off the ground.
Yeah, and I think to your point, so this is why, you know, again, the reason why I always wanted to be kind of in this role and launch String Can, gosh, 16 plus years ago, or about 16 years ago, is people on the leadership side will often tell themselves what they'll justify the answer. And so, for example, if they're like, "Oh, our salesperson we have right now is horrible," and they're blaming marketing, then the problem is now marketing, not sales, or vice versa. And so I think, the reason why I think we do a great job is we come in there because we don't have, any, financial obligation to that company at that point in time yet. And so there is no reason why we shouldn't go in there eyes wide open and asking the right questions to help understand what the right path might be. But, back to your question, what's funny is that about a year or so ago, I had this exact question come up from a business and they were thinking that they came to me and they wanted to hire like a head of marketing. And they were asking for advice on how they could find that role and what that role should do. And they basically wanted that person to solve world hunger. Um, and I actually came back after doing my due diligence and said, I actually recommend you hire someone in sales. And the reason why in that situation is that the company was so niche. They had maybe 500 businesses out there that could even buy from them. Their offering was very unique. They had a pretty good reputation. They were already very involved in some really key conferences. A traditional marketing strategy might not get them the ROI they were expecting. But instead, if they had a really smart outbound strategy in place for that kind of business, and that person was armed with the right tools with the collateral and how the offering works and whatnot, potentially they could have amazing success from a more of a business development traditional model than having a whole marketing department in place. Because they also had a capacity issue there where they're like, I'm like, okay, let's pretend we hire a head of marketing, and that person brings in 30 leads a month of the 500 total that you can get. And let's say you close all 30, what happens? He's like, we would die overnight. He's like, we can't even handle that. So I'm like, well, if you go and turn on the marketing, faucet and start generating all those opportunities, to your point just now, Sarah, that could really damage your reputation because if people are saying they're interested in talking with you and you don't have the capacity to even handle calling those people back, that's going to look really bad upon you guys. And that's why I just think it's so smart for businesses that they're asking these questions. Often, first, are they asking the right questions? And then secondly, are they just too close to it? Because if they think that doing the opposite of what they're doing today is going to solve the problem, that might just make a whole other set of new problems. And so I love the idea of like having someone come in that understands both sales and marketing and your revenue and growth and all that stuff to do a holistic view, a whole 360 of the business because you might learn that where you need to make your next chess move it might not be at all what you were thinking it needs to be. And again, we don't have any skin in the game at that point in time yet, so there's no reason why we shouldn't be honest and give them all of our experience we've seen both the pros and cons in helping guiding people from making a huge mistake. And that's why I do find value and maybe before making the investment of hiring someone that might cost, I don't know, 150 grand. And then obviously, Sarah, you always teach me that just what you pay them in payroll isn't the actual true cost. What's the number? I think what you said was it three or four times the cost of
It
someone?
depends, but yeah, it's like the burden rate, the baked
Yeah.
in, depending on your benefits, and
And the
you got
onboarding
a
and all that
fancy
stuff. And
space. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think for people, I think sometimes, executives think, okay, this is a 150K, opportunity we've got to hire someone. Which should we hire? And it might actually make sense to bring more of a fractional role on, or a contractor or an agency to help get figure out what exactly you need to build the proper system and SOPs and whatnot. Because if none of that's in place, I think you might find that you hit a wall a lot faster than you expected.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I had never really thought about the fractional as sort of um, a precursor to making a big hire like that. It's a great way to test, where your gaps are because I think a lot of those really experienced, CMOs or heads of sales, they come in and they're expecting to like hit the ground running, especially sales. I mean, not that marketers aren't competitive, but that's just how salespeople are wired. They want to get in and they want to be successful like as soon as possible. But if they're busy like writing SOPs and like fixing their system and making things talk, it's like I did not sign up for this. I signed up to like grow this pipeline to crazy lengths. And so if you have a fractional, I think you can kind of figure out where the biggest problems are and kind of start patching those up before you bring someone in so that it's like their runway is now cleared for them and they're not having to stop, get out and clear the pathway, go on, continue on. And by that time, they've lost a lot of new hire momentum, which regardless of your seniority or experience, there's always a bit of like new role excitement that someone brings, and you don't want to tamper that down with, minutia, because you are putting a big investment in them. And sure, maybe they're willing to do it, and they'll do it with a smile on their face, and maybe that actually is enjoyable to them. But it would almost be more beneficial from a utilization perspective to say, can you take this and make sure it's fitting what your expectations are and edit it versus creating it from scratch?
Yeah. I mean, I think about it, Sarah. I mean, how many times have we have had chats with our clients? I'm not going to name them, but I'm thinking about two that comes to mind immediately where, they're the head of marketing and one's currently at the current company and one ended up leaving. But in both situations, they were hired on to be a true chief marketing officer, which again, even that term, as we know, causes a lot of confusion regarding are they doing strategy or they're doing the actual work or how does that work? It just becomes a very, very complicated role. And then it becomes like this like department head that they just keep dumping on. Like, well, now your job is to figure out the paint for the walls and the letterhead. And also, by the way, find new vendors to help with landscaping. It's just all over the place. But in both scenarios, they were expected to come in and deliver, a really smart strategy within, let's say, 60 or 90 days. But they came in and it was just a complete mess. And they were expected to do things that they didn't sign up for. And no one really understood how many gaps they had. And so it took, 6+ months to get just the basics in place. And, that was frustrating not only to the person that we know, but also the company. And that's because they really didn't have anyone that oversaw marketing or sales there before. And then once they hired a talented person, they got in there and realized we don't even have like a proper logo. Like we don't have access to our analytics. We don't have all these things, and it basically does prevent them from being able to do their best job. And that's why I wasn't trying to be a jerk before when you asked me the question of head, chicken egg marketing or sales. I just started reflecting on how many times we've been asked that question and people think it's just answer the question. Every company should follow this formula. And it's just, depending upon the age of the business and what they've done in the past and where they want to go, just the amount of variables in play, it's not an easy question. And so, yes, if I was forced to answer the question, I would have answered probably exactly the way you did before, which is annoying. Um, so we can't have overly spicy chats on that. But marketing obviously is needed to help the sales team keep busy. But again, depending upon the business, sales might be the answer. But I am answering the question being annoying by saying I would want to go there and be like, a diagnostic architect And I'd want to end up building out, this very impressive roadmap to help give everyone peace of mind that here's the logical steps, assuming all these variables work out as we're hoping they work out, what you all need to do. But if you don't have the proper architects and model in place to build out what that should look like, it's very challenging. That's why I think some companies they might hire a chief revenue officer, a head of sales and marketing, and poach them from another business because that personnel might have done exactly that. And so if they have the experience on figuring all this out and they're hired to know that their first project is first to figure out what do we have and what are we missing, the obstacles and opportunities, and then build a roadmap there. And then from there decide where the priorities need to be between marketing and sales. That makes sense to me. But finding that unicorn that has the experience that can do all that and the exact company that the company needs is often it's more than one person. Like look at our responsibilities when we're hired on by businesses to do this for them. We'll typically bring in 5 or 6 different resources from our team in the project because everyone's got different skill set and mindsets, and that 1 plus 1 far exceeds 2. And so that's why I'm answering your question by saying I would want to do a proper diagnostic and due diligence to figure out what they have first before answering that question.
And I think, the lesson for me is that I made some very unconscious assumptions. So your diagnostic thing is totally accurate because it could, I have to say, depends on, if you've got solid lead flow, well then you can't knock that pipeline and put a kink in it. You got to figure out how to manage the business and also figure out how to grow it. And so I think those two things need different sets of eyeballs.
Yep.
There's a bit of a potential conflict there when you're trying to implement change, and so you got to be careful with what's working and what isn't, and really get clear on that. So,
I mean, think about
unfortunately,
it. We had a client about 2 years ago that, and we're not working with them right now, but, the owner had, a family member overseeing marketing. And in that scenario, they were like, our salespeople can't close these leads that our marketing person is bringing in. And so they wanted just to keep on hiring different salespeople, and they were just churning through them like a crazy, what do you call the spinning door in a
a
hotel?
revolving door.
Revolving door, thank you. I'm like, what's the R word I'm looking for? But if you think about like, 100 mile per hour wind and there's a revolving door just spinning around, chewing up salespeople, it might be that the marketing person's not doing the right stuff. And that's why, again, it's just it's I don't know why I'm still surprised by this, but more often than not, we find that people don't take a step back, companies, and look at what they have in place today first because often what you're working with today might actually be the problem. And just adding on their level of leadership to oversee and inherit some of that, I think is unfair. And that's why it's really hard is if you're like hired on as a head of marketing, and let's say there's already 2 marketing people and 7 salespeople in place, because everyone believes that the issue is they don't have good strategy on the marketing side, and that marketing person comes in and realizes that everyone that they have in place isn't really on the bus in the right seat.
Mm,
And that becomes a whole new set of problems. But unfortunately, you might need to bring a person of that caliber in to make open up your eyes to realize that maybe the problem is internal. It's not adding a new body.
yeah, no, I agree with all of that. All right. Well, this was a great topic. Thank you, Jay. And, we'd love for you guys to debate us because I think there's a lot of nuance to this one, and I'd be curious what other experiences have led people to believe. So thank you, Jay, and everybody have a super day.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.